Hello and welcome back to I Completed 80s Music with me, the 80s Mixtaper. Consider me the key weapon down the pub quiz as long as the subject matter is 80s pop. Otherwise, if it's a political history round, I'm pretty useless. If you're new to the pod, back in 2016 I decided to try and listen to every single UK charting entry of the UK charts from the 31st of December 1979 to the 31st of December 1989, which I finally finished in early 2021. This pod is the story of that journey, and each week we inch the calendar a little more forward and explore the best, brightest and most bonkers songs that the 80s decade has to offer. We talk about the singers, the bands, the producers, the songwriters, the startups, the breakups and everything in between. Now, due to copyright laws, we cannot play the songs on the pod, but to combat this problem, I've created hyperlink playlists for both Spotify and Apple Music, which you will find in the episode description, so you can listen along as we discuss each track. There's also a full track listing below those links, just in case your pod platform of choice doesn't support hyperlinks. Most do, but I've noticed that there are one or two where it converts them just to text. These are 13 song playlists like the albums of yore, so one week we'll take the first 7 songs and then the next week we'll flip over to side 2 metaphorically and explore the last 6. Which brings us to today, playlist 37, February 1982. Today's a fascinating episode. Can you believe that we've reached 1982 and so far not met either Black Sabbath or Kiss, two paragons of 70s rock? Well, today all that changes. But as we'll see, there's an accidental theme today, and that is pivot points and cracks. Staying on that theme, the Jam drop an absolute classic single which jumps straight to number 1, but pivots and cracks. The Geils band do the same, as do the Nolans and the Associates. In fact, only one band escapes this problem unscathed, as at the end of the episode, ABC arrive to save the day and announce themselves on the world stage. So without further ado, let's get back to the music. It's February 1982, and an Aussie-less Black Sabbath released the single Turn Up the Night. It's the sound of a band that shouldn't have existed anymore, moving at a speed they hadn't touched in a while. It's the opening track of 1981's Mob Rules, and it sounds like a dare. It sounds like Tony Iommi, the man who practically invented the heavy metal riff, deciding that if the world was moving towards the new wave of British heavy metal, toward Iron Maiden and Saxon, then he was going to show them exactly who the architect was. But before we get to the night being turned up, we have to talk about the darkness that came before. This is track 1, playlist 37. If you saw any of last July's tribute to Ozzy Osbourne and then his sad passing soon after, you will know that Black Sabbath were not just a band. They were, and are, revered. Formed in Birmingham in 1968, the original 4, guitarist Tony Iommi, bassist Geezer Butler, drummer Bill Ward and vocalist Ozzy Osbourne, were 4 working-class lads trying to escape the literal and metaphorical factory smoke of Aston, Birmingham. They started as a blues rock outfit called Earth, but everything shifted when they wrote a song named Black Sabbath after a 1963 Boris Karloff film. Suddenly, it wasn't blues, it was metal. From 1970 to 75, they were untouchable. Paranoid, Master of Reality Volume 4. These aren't just albums, they are the foundation stones of a genre. But by the late 70s, the group was fraying. The drugs weren't just part of the lifestyle, they were the lifestyle. On the Volume 4 sessions, they reportedly spent more on cocaine than they did on the actual recording. By 1979, the wheels had come off. Ozzy Osbourne had become famously unreliable. He was missing rehearsals, disappearing for days, and when he did show up, the creative spark was buried under a mountain of chemical dependency. On the 27th of April 1979, at Tony Iommi's insistence, the band made the call to officially fire him. Bill Ward, Ozzy's closest friend in the group, was the one sent to the hotel room to tell him he was out. Ozzy thought his career was over. He locked himself in a room for months, waiting for the end. Of course, we know from episode 13 that Ozzy, with the help of his then manager, now wife Sharon Arden, and guitarist Randy Rhoads, Ozzy does put his life back together, resulting in the release of Crazy Train, and the rest, as they say, is history. But Sabbath wasn't done either. They needed a voice that could handle Iommi's shifting musical ambitions. Someone who could sing over the heaviness, but also handle the melody. Enter Ronnie James Dio. When Dio joined Black Sabbath in 1979, he changed the band's DNA. He was a trained musician who wrote his own lyrics, a stark contrast to the Ozzy era where Geezer Butler handled the pen. Their first album together, 1980's Heaven and Hell, was a massive success, reaching number 9 in the UK and saving the band from total irrelevance. But by 1981, as they began working on Mob Rules, the classic lineup was already changing again. Original drummer Bill Ward, struggling with severe alcoholism and personal loss, had left in the middle of the Heaven and Hell tour on the 19th of August 1980. He was replaced by 21-year-old American Vinny Appice, who officially debuted at the Aloha Stadium show on the 31st of August 1980. Turn Up the Night was released as a single in January 1982 in the UK. It was a high-octane mission statement for the band. Iommi's riff is frantic, driven by Appice's more straight-ahead and heavy drumming style compared to Ward's jazz-influenced swing. Lyrically, Dio moved the band away from the occult and everyman themes and toward high fantasy and cinematic imagery, the metaphorical turning up of the night. The context of this single's release was one of high pressure. They had to prove Heaven and Hell wasn't a fluke. While the album Mob Rules went gold in the US and reached the top 20 in the UK, the internal cracks were still widening. Tony Iommi later admitted that the production sessions, led by Martin Birch, were mired in drug use still, including by Birch himself, which Iommi felt hurt the sound. Tensions eventually boiled over during the mixing of the subsequent live album Live Evil. Iommi and Butler accused Dio of sneaking into the studio at night to turn up the volume on his own vocals. While Iommi later admitted this might have been a misunderstanding involving the engineer, the damage was done. Dio and Appice left shortly after to form the band Dio. Ward would return on the drums, and Ian Gillan, formerly of Deep Purple, would fill in on vocals, but by 1984, only Iommi would remain, and we would have to wait 13 years to 1997 for the original lineup to reunite. Turn Up the Night stands as the peak of that brief lightning-in-a-bottle second era. It's the sound of a band that had found its new lease of life and was determined to burn as brightly as possible before the next inevitable collapse. For track 2, another party favourite, though when you consider the erotic nature of the subject matter, one has to wonder why, but that's the 80s for you. This is a song that represents the exact pivot point where the 1970s bar band grit met the 1980s neon gloss. It's a track that feels like a high school nostalgia crashing into the reality of adulthood, all wrapped up in one of the most infectious na 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 choruses ever recorded. This is the story of Centrefold by the Geils band. Press play now. What an absolute tune. That one always takes me back to various birthday parties from the 80s. Before we get to the magazine and that famous classroom video, we have to understand where this band came from. By the time they hit number 1 in 1982, the Geils band were already a seasoned unit with over a decade of road miles. They formed in 1967 in Worcester, Massachusetts, originally as an acoustic blues trio called Snoopy and the Sopwith Camels. That trio consisted of guitarist John J. Geils, bassist Danny Klein, often called Dr. Funk, and the harmonica wizard Richard Salwitz, better known as Magic Dick. As they moved towards an electric sound, they relocated to Boston and added the final pieces. Drummer Stephen Joe Bladd and a fast-talking former midnight DJ from radio station WBCN named Peter Wolf, who went by the on-air handle The Woofer Goofer. Keyboardist Seth Justman joined in 1968, completing the lineup that would stick together for the next 15 years. They signed with Atlantic Records in 1970 and spent the decade earning a reputation as one of the best live acts in America, often called America's answer to the Rolling Stones. They had regional success and minor hits like Must Have Got Lost, which reached number 12 in 1975, and Love Stinks, which reached number 38 in 1980, but they hadn't yet achieved global superstardom. Then came Freeze Frame. Centrefold was released in September 1981 in the US as the lead single from the band's 10th studio album, Freeze Frame. While the band had considered other songs for the first single, such as Angel in Blue, their label EMI America pushed for Centrefold. The gamble was historic. The song hit number 1 on the Billboard Hot 100 in February 1982 and stayed there for 6 consecutive weeks. It also topped the charts in Australia and Canada and reached number 3 in the UK. The song was written and produced by keyboardist Seth Justman. The lyrics are a first-person narrative of a man who finds his high school crush posing in the pages of a men's magazine. Some sources suggest the song was inspired by a real-life situation involving an actress named Angel Tompkins, who had been a girlfriend of Peter Wolf and posed for Playboy in 1972. Musically, it was a bold pivot into new wave. Seth Justman later addressed why the band hadn't used synthesizers as heavily on their 1970s records. It wasn't a lack of interest, but a lack of funds. Despite their fame, they were trapped in a debt cycle with their record label, constantly owing money for advances and recording costs. The song's immortality was cemented by its music video, directed by Seth's brother, Paul Justman. Set in a stylised classroom, the band performed surrounded by girls in various stages of undress, who were reportedly students from a dance academy located above the recording studio, recruited at the very last minute for the shoot. They used the momentum of Centrefold to release further singles, including the album title track, which we'll definitely hear on this pod. But, as ever is the story on this podcast, the heights of Freeze Frame also brought cracks. The friction between Peter Wolf, who wanted to return to the band's R&B and blues roots, and Justman, who wanted to pursue this new pop-driven success, led to tension. But in this moment, they leave us staring at the staples of this beautiful, well-endowed pop classic. Next up, we're back with The Jam and the story of Town Called Malice, a song that turned a grey Surrey town into a Motown-infused anthem of working-class survival. We last saw The Jam in 1981 with That's Entertainment, a song that famously became one of the biggest-selling import singles in UK history. By the time the band entered Air Studios on London's Oxford Street in October 1981 to record what would become their final album, The Gift, frontman Paul Weller was moving away from the power trio post-punk aesthetic. He was diving headlong into soul, funk and jazz, aiming for a 1980s brand of soul. Influenced by the polished pop of Michael Jackson's Off the Wall and the classic Tamla Motown sound, the sessions produced a double A-side single that would define this next step in their story. This is track 3, press play now. When you hear that opening bass line, that driving caffeinated thump, you're hearing Bruce Foxton playing a very specific homage to the Supremes' 1966 hit, You Can't Hurry Love. It's a classic Motown steel that helped the track become a bona fide classic. But while the music was built for the dance floor, the lyrics were built for the picket line. Released as a double A-side with Precious on the 29th of January 1982, Town Called Malice was a direct reflection of Weller's upbringing in Woking. He described it as a depressed place where the swinging 60s never arrived. The imagery is famously specific. The rows and rows of disused milk floats were inspired by a real Unigate dairy yard near his childhood home on Stanley Road. The ghost of a steam train refers to a Woking station nearby where he'd hear the nighttime shunting of carriages. It wasn't just a memoir, it was a class war tirade against the reality of Thatcher-era Britain. Weller wrote about a world where families had to choose between beer or the kids' new gear. Despite the anger, there was a defiant call to action. It's up to us to change this town called Malice. The single was a phenomenon. It debuted at number 1 on the UK singles chart on the 9th of February 1982, holding the spot for 3 weeks. It was so popular that it famously kept the Stranglers golden brown at number 2. This led to EMI to complain to the chart compilers because the Jam were aggregating sales from the standard 7-inch and a 12-inch version that featured a live recording of Town Called Malice and an extended version of Precious. The success was so total that from the 18th of February 1982, the Jam became the first band since the Beatles to be invited to perform both sides of the single on a single edition of Top of the Pops. But this peak was also the beginning of the end. The soulful direction Weller was taking didn't sit well with Foxton or drummer Rick Buckler. Although The Gift became their first number 1 album upon its release in 1982, Weller would announce the band split by the end of the year, but we're not there yet. Town Called Malice remains the band's final loud sneer at the system, later finding new life in the iconic dance sequence of the film Billy Elliot. It stands as a perfect 3-minute capture of a country in recession, a songwriter in transition, and a band at the very top of their game. Talking of transition, that seems to be the theme of this week's episode, and so we introduce another band to the picture, also in transition. It's 1982, and it seems mad that we've only just introduced Black Sabbath. The same can be said for this next group, who, like Sabbath, were the megastars of 70s rock, but now find themselves at exactly the same crossroads, confronted by the new wave of heavy metal. It's time we met Kiss. But not the rock and roll all night Kiss, not the I was made for loving you Kiss. We are playing a song that represents one of the most spectacular sequined identity crises in rock history. It is a track that features no loud drums, no pyro, and most shockingly for this band, absolutely no party. The year is 1981, bleeding into 1982. This is A World Without Heroes. Track 4, press play now. To understand why this song is such a bizarre pivot, we have to look at what Kiss was. Founded in 1973 by Paul Stanley and Gene Simmons, along with Ace Frehley and Peter Criss, Kiss wasn't just a band, they were a brand. Throughout the 1970s, they conquered the world with white face paint, 5-inch platform boots, and a stage show involving the best pyrotechnics around. They were the invulnerable superheroes of rock and roll. But by 1981, the capes were fraying. Peter Criss was gone, replaced by Eric Carr. Disco and pop experiments on the previous 2 albums, Dynasty and Unmasked, had alienated their hardcore fan base. Meanwhile, the new wave of British heavy metal was making their theatrical brand of rock look vintage. In a bid for artistic credibility, Kiss decided to record a concept album. They reunited with Bob Ezrin, the producer of their 1976 hit Destroyer. According to an interview with Ezrin, the goal was to create something meaningful. The result was Music from the Elder, an orchestral soundtrack to a movie that didn't exist. It was a commercial disaster, peaking at only number 75 on the Billboard 200. The centrepiece of this strange, ambitious project was a sombre, acoustic-driven ballad called A World Without Heroes. When we think of Gene Simmons, we think of the hair, the face paint, the overly large sexualised tongue. We do not usually think of a man questioning a moral vacuum. Yet, A World Without Heroes is exactly that. The song is a fascinating collaboration credited to Gene Simmons, Paul Stanley, Bob Ezrin, and most notably Lou Reed. Reed's involvement was facilitated by Ezrin, who had produced Reed's 1973 album Berlin. The song actually began life as a Paul Stanley demo titled Every Little Bit of Your Heart. When it was adapted for the concept album, Lou Reed contributed the central poetic line, A World Without Heroes is like a world without sun. According to Gene Simmons' own account, Reed provided lyrics for several songs on the album in about an hour after a single phone call. The song reached number 56 on the Billboard Hot 100. For a band used to platinum success, this was a major step back. It remains a cult favourite because it so fundamentally is un-Kiss. For one, Gene Simmons discards his demon growl for a vulnerable, almost fragile register. Furthermore, while Ace Frehley was still in the band, he was increasingly alienated during these sessions. As noted in various biographical accounts, the melodic, tasteful guitar solo on this track was actually performed by Paul Stanley. The accompanying video was the first Kiss video to be played on the fledgling MTV. It featured the band in full makeup, but playing in sombre stillness, and it really doesn't work. It's a jarring image for fans. By early 1982, Kiss was at a breaking point. Music from the Elder failed so significantly that the band did not embark on a supporting tour, the first time in their history they stayed off the road following a release. They made only a handful of promotional appearances, including a performance on the TV show Fridays in January 1982. A World Without Heroes was their first attempt to be artists with the capital A. It proved that they had range, but the public didn't want art from Kiss, they wanted the circus. Soon after, they would pivot again, stripping off the makeup and releasing the heavy-hitting Creatures of the Night. But for one brief moment, the demons stopped spitting blood and asked us what happens when the dreams die. For track 5, this, folks, is our last visit to the Nolans. But they go out in style. When we last saw the Nolans in 1981, they were riding high off Attention to Me, a song that somehow manages to be both a desperate plea for validation and a lovely example in early 80s Euro disco precision. By this point, they aren't the Nolan sisters anymore. They've dropped the sisters, they've dropped the Cardigans, they are a streamlined four-women pop machine consisting of Bernie, Linda, Maureen and Colleen. And they are quite literally the biggest thing in Japan, outselling the Beatles and winning the Tokyo Music Festival with sexy music. But back in the UK, the nice girls from Blackpool Image is starting to chafe. They're moving into the Portrait era, an album that feels like a group trying to negotiate their adulthood in real time. This brings us to a song that's as much about boundary setting as it is a top 20 hit. This is Don't Love Me Too Hard. Track 5, press play now. Don't Love Me Too Hard was released in February 1982. It peaked at number 14 in the UK, but its history is a bit more of a geographical shell game. In Japan, this song was so central to their identity that the entire Portrait album was actually released under the title Don't Love Me Too Hard months before the British public ever saw it. The song is written by the Ben Finden, Bob Pusey and Mike Myers triumvirate, the same team that gave them I'm in the Mood for Dancing. But the mood has changed. If dancing was the invitation, Don't Love Me Too Hard, well, maybe that's the fine print. Listen to the lyrics. No, honey, you're moving too fast. I know that you want to please me, but don't think it's easy. It's a song about physical agency. It's about the what's your hurry boy of it all. In 1996, the Spice Girls would do this with Two Become One, a song famous for its Be a Little Wiser Baby, Put It On line about contraception and slowing down. But 14 years earlier, the Nolans were already setting these terms over a heavy disco pop bass line. This track also serves as a bittersweet milestone. It is the final UK Top 20 single to feature Linda Nolan before her departure later that year. Linda's exit wasn't just a career move, it was a fracture in the family business. She left to go solo after her husband Brian Hudson was dismissed as the group's tour manager by the other sisters. In the fallout, the tabloids gave Linda a nickname that followed her for decades, Naughty Nolan. It was a tag born from a series of provocative publicity photos that leaned into the very sexuality Don't Love Me Too Hard was trying to navigate with such caution. It's the classic pop star trap. The moment you stop being a sister or a girl, the world demands you be naughty to prove you're a woman. The Portrait album would go on to be one of the first 50 pop albums ever released on compact disc in Japan. But in the UK, it marked the end of an era. Anne Nolan would eventually rejoin as Linda exited, shifting the lineup yet again. But the lightning in a bottle moment of the early 80s was beginning to dissipate. They would make music all the way up to 1992, but this was their last charting single. We say goodbye to them now. For track 6, we need to talk about a voice. That voice. It's a voice that swoops and dives, and it operatically ascends towards the rafters of a cathedral that hasn't been built yet. It belongs to Billy Mackenzie, a man who allegedly spent his share of a £60,000 record company advance on luxuries including a hotel room specifically for his pet whippets, whom he fed room service smoked salmon. But before we get to the whippets and the salmon, we have to talk about the piano. That opening piano riff in Party Fears 2. It sounds like someone dropping a handful of diamonds onto a marble floor. It's bright, it's brittle, and it's slightly melancholic. It's the sound of the 1980s waking up with a hangover and deciding to put on full theatrical makeup anyway. This is the moment where post-punk stopped brooding in the corner and decided to become the most interesting and most terrified person at the party. This is Party Fears 2 by the Associates. Press play now. Before this song hit the UK top 10 in 1982, the Associates were a duo from Scotland. Billy Mackenzie from Dundee and Alan Rankin from the Bridge of Allan. They met in 1976 and their early trajectory was defined by a restless avant-garde spirit. They didn't want to be a pub rock band, they wanted to be European art house cinema in musical form. Their first release was a perversely timed cover of David Bowie's Boys Keep Swinging, released in 1979 while the original was still in the charts. Their debut album, 1980's The Affectionate Punch, was a sharp, angular slice of post-punk. But it was their move to the Situation 2 label and the experimental singles that followed, where they did things like amplify sound through vacuum cleaner tubes, that showed their true teeth. By 1982, they were ready for their pop moment. They signed to WEA and with producer Mike Hedges entered the studio to record the album Sulk. Now, why does Party Fears 2 feel so strange? Why does it feel like a panic attack happening inside a crystal palace? The title itself came from Mackenzie's brother, who told a story about two girls who tried to crash a party by smashing windows and kicking the door in with their stiletto heels. Mackenzie pinched the title, though the lyrics moved towards a deeper sense of social alienation. Alan Rankin later described the feeling behind the song as being like imposters at a party, standing there with forged papers. The recording of the track was full of the more is more philosophy. Producer Mike Hedges recalled that they used a massive amount of reverb to create that swimming sound. The famous piano riff was played by Rankin on a Yamaha Grand, but the sessions overall for the Sulk album were famously eccentric. Rankin confirmed that they experimented with urinating in a guitar and filling drums with water just to see how it affected the acoustics. Mackenzie was known for his recording rituals, sometimes demanding the studio be filled with the scent of lilies because he liked the smell of funerals. When they performed Party Fears 2 on Top of the Pops in February 1982, it became a landmark moment. Mackenzie appeared in a beret and raincoat, looking like a silent film star. In a later appearance, he reportedly fed the audience pieces of a chocolate guitar. Party Fears 2 reached number 9 in the UK charts. For a brief window, the Associates were the biggest cult band in the world, and further singles in 1982, including Club Country, which we'll hear on this pod, waited in the wings. However, the metaphor in this episode lurked round the corner, and the quote-unquote cracks were beginning to show, but we're not there yet. Party Fears 2 remains a song that cannot be categorised. Synth pop, post-punk and grand opera all at once. It's the sound of a man who saw the world through a prism. Everything was brighter, sharper, and much more frightening than it appeared to everyone else. For our final track today, a band that wow, isn't breaking up or at a pivot. In fact, they're just about to announce themselves on the world stage. And we're all wearing gold lame jackets. When we last checked in on ABC, the year was 1981. We were talking about Tears Are Not Enough, episode 31.5 to be precise, a debut single that reached number 19 in the UK. It was the first sign that Martin Fry, a former fanzine editor, had decided that if you can't beat the pop stars, you should become the most perfect version of one. But Tears Are Not Enough was produced by Steve Brown. For what came next, ABC wanted something more polished. They approached Trevor Horn, the man who killed the radio star, who we've met with Buggles, and who was producing Dollars music and was currently busy inventing the sound of the future. Horn brought in engineer Gary Langan and Anne Dudley, a classically trained arranger whose orchestrations would give the band a cinematic weight. They were aiming for the lexicon of love. Fry's goal was to mix Cole Porter with Chic. He wasn't interested in the lo-fi aesthetic of post-punk. He wanted the gloss, glamour, and the sound of money. This is the second single from that era. This is the moment the bow was drawn back and fires a poison arrow. This is track 7, Playlist 37, our final track today. Poison Arrow was released on the 15th of February 1982. It reached number 6 on the UK singles chart and peaked at number 25 on the Billboard Hot 100 in 1983. To understand this song, it's important to note the interplay between Fry's wit and Horn's perfectionism. During the recording at RAK and Psalm East, Horn wasn't just recording a band, he was mapping them out perfectly. The track is held together by a Roland TR-808 backbone, which Horn programmed along with a Mini-Moog bass line to serve as a map for the band to play over. This ensured the dance floor feel while keeping David Palmer's live drumming and Mark White's guitar and keyboard work human. The secret weapon of Poison Arrow is the middle 8. The music drops out, leaving just shimmering piano and Fry's spoken word dialogue. He plays a man in a disintegrating relationship, with the female response provided by backing singer Karen Clayton. I thought you loved me, but it seems you don't care, Fry pleads. I care enough to know I can never love you, Clayton responds. Then comes the hook, you think you're smart, stupid. The music video, directed by Julian Temple, featured Fry in multiple roles. A waiter, a lounge singer, all pursuing the same woman, played by future reality star Lisa Vanderpump. Fry described the visual style as a mix of An American in Paris and The Benny Hill Show. Poison Arrow remains the definitive ABC track because it balances the irony of new pop with genuine melodic craftsmanship. By the same time the final sax solo from Stephen Singleton fades, ABC had moved from Sheffield outsiders to the vanguard of global pop, where they would stay for the rest of the decade. So, that's the first half of Playlist 37, but do be sure to join us as we begin to exit February 1982 in the second half of the playlist next week. ABBA finally go off the rails, Kraftwerk keep the beat ice cold, Iron Maiden make quite the entrance, Madness have a cardiac arrest, Journey drop a single so great it will create Glee 30 years later, and we go herb picking with Foster and Allen. Have a lovely week, and we'll see you in the next episode of I Completed 80s Music. Take care.